Welcome to the Michigan Man Podcast on Wolverine Sports Radio, a member of the V Sporto Network, and in partnership with SB Nation's Maize and Brew, for Wolverine fans from coast to coast. Go Blue and welcome to the show. I'm your host, Mike Fitzpatrick. In just a moment, we'll be joined by Steve Lorenz from 24/7 Sports with the latest football recruiting news. First, a few of my thoughts to get us started as always. Spring practice is just about wrapped up. The new offense has been put in place, well, at least 90% of it according to Josh Gaddis. Next up is the trip to South Africa, which will get plenty of coverage in the coming weeks. Then we wait. It will be 4 months of speculation, previews, and best guesses as to what kind of team we'll have this year. It will get here soon enough, so let's enjoy some summer first. One thing, though, that never takes a break is recruiting. It's the lifeblood of college football. We are off to a pretty good start with the class of 2020, but in the coming weeks, the process will really heat up. My guest today thinks we're in pretty good shape on the recruiting trail and could be putting together another big-time, maybe even top 10 class. Steve Lorenz from 24/7 Sports joins me next here on the Michigan Man in partnership with SB Nation's Maize and Brew. Back with us on our game day segment this week to talk a little recruiting and more is Steve Lorenz from 24/7 Sports. Once again, great to have you with us, Steve.
Good to be back, Mike.
Well, of course, a lot has been going on in the last month with spring football. Recruiting, as always, going strong. First question, though, Steve, is it's really not a recruiting item, but in the news in the last couple of weeks, cornerback Miles Sims entered the transfer portal. We didn't hear much about him during spring practice, but was that any kind of a surprise to you?
Probably not, actually. I think, we had done a couple write-ups on him a few weeks ago where had gotten some mixed signals about his standing on the depth chart. And just in general, it's kind of one of those deals where it's like you can't explicitly say what the deal is maybe, but you kind of got to, if you're capable of reading between the lines a little bit, I think it was definitely a situation where it felt like an uphill battle for him in the depth chart, especially for whatever reason. I know he had fought a couple of minor injuries the off season, like heading into spring practice. I don't know if that had any impact on things or what, but and then I think Mike Zordich, really only mentioned him in passing in his press conference last week, and Zordich is one of those, there's a lot of the assistants on the staff now are really thorough. You ask them who's standing out, and then they just try to literally list every player at that position. With Sims, he kind of mentioned him only in passing. Matter of fact, I think he had to get brought up for him to garner a mention, which is usually kind of an indication, that maybe things are not looking too good. So yeah, I mean, it wasn't a total surprise for me. I suspect he'll probably try to go closer to home. And, Michigan, I mean, Vince Gray's had a great spring practice. The other guy, I think Jamon Green was having a great finish to spring practice too. He's, one of the 18s out of Texas, the Twins, so I think, they have guys. I know they really like Jalen Perry, the early enrollee they have, and then DJ Turner's on campus in June. So, not a deal where it's like a huge blow or anything to their secondary, I don't think. But I would say, like, Sims was a guy that, on the recruiting trail that, I mean, they really, really liked him a lot. So I think there is some disappointment there as a guy that I think they felt like, really the funny thing, in 18, is that was the big story about 18 was a lot of lower-ish ranked guys that maybe would take 2 or 3 years to kind of the Uche path where they're not going to be instant impact guys, but a few years in the system, you might find a couple real studs. So I always got the impression that Sims was one of the safer bets in the class, at least in their eyes. So I would assume there's some disappointment there in the idea that it didn't work out.
Well, back on the recruiting trail then, Steve, for the class of 2020, news in the last week or so was that wideout Khalil Branham from Ohio decommitted. Is that one where you can say you saw that coming?
Yeah, this is kind of the way I explained it on the site last week. His primary recruiters, when he committed, were Al Washington and Pep Hamilton. So, you can kind of put 2 and 2 together there and say that, maybe he really wasn't a fit with what they're looking to do offensively going forward. Good player. I think Kentucky's probably the odds-on favorite to land him going forward. But as far as it being a big surprise, no, not really. I mean, we just got to be honest. Like, you and I have talked like through the last 3 or 4 cycles. There's always a few guys that seem to commit really early that, once the process continues, and this is just speaking factually too. This isn't an opinion. I mean, the history shows it. I mean, the Michigans, there's always a few guys that seem to, they take really early and then things kind of fade away and then they decommit. Branham was kind of one of those guys in my mind. We'll see if there are any more of the guys that are currently verbally committed. I mean, there's none that I'm like, definitely that guy or anything like that. But, like I said, history is showing, I mean, this is kind of common, and not just at Michigan, but other schools too. But with Michigan, they take some verbals like very early in the process. And sometimes it's like a guy they probably could have waited on, and taken later in the, later in the cycle, something like that. So no, with Branham, not a real big surprise. They're in on a lot of really good receivers too right now. Guys like AJ Henning, Xavier Watts, some of those types of guys. So, they have I think a little bit of a different board with Josh Gaddis in charge. And I think they decided to, to mutually part ways, or however you want to say it. So
now, as far as the other wideouts that we're in on this year, you mentioned a couple of those names. Are there any that were close to getting verbals from that you would say in that group?
Not any that like really, really stand out. I think Watts is probably a summer decision. Not really clear if Michigan would be the choice. I think that's, if I had to guess, it'd probably like a Nebraska, Notre Dame, or Michigan type deal. Henning, that one I kind of feel like might go a while. He took a trip, like one of those down south swings, where they see like 5 schools in like 6 days. And I know he really liked Georgia, and I think may have liked Auburn too. There was another school down there that he really kind of vibed with a little bit too. So, and again, Notre Dame, really, in my opinion, though, probably the primary competition for Michigan. So none that like I'm like really banking on committing in the near future, I guess would be the best way to say. Well, like for instance, like Rayshawn Williams out of Detroit King, like, I think he's committing a week from today, but it won't be Michigan. And so, it'll be those 2 guys I mentioned. There's some other guys they're recruiting, a little bit harder right now. So, we'll see where they're at in a couple months probably.
Well, as of right now in this class of 2020, how many receivers do you think we would like to get committed?
It's kind of a good question. I mean, to me, with Sainra still now definitely an offensive guy, because he was kind of one of those let's see what happens when he gets here kind of guy as far as what his position was going to be. But obviously, he's had more hype than almost any non-contributor or new face, of anybody. So, because you still have Giles Jackson enrolling in the summer, and you still have George Johnson enrolling this summer. So I kind of think, Jackson is definitely an offensive guy. Johnson's a guy, maybe could be a defensive player. I mean, so it may actually depend partially on kind of how they look at him. But, here's the thing is they took, potentially 5 receivers in 19, depending on what Johnson does. And you have at least 3 guys with Black, Peoples-Jones, and Collins who, if they have a good enough year this year, could jet. And then all of a sudden you're like, kind of left with a very young and inexperienced group, albeit very talented. Because I still think Cornelius Johnson, another true freshman who will enroll this summer, I think is a guy who's going to be really, really good. So it's, to me, I mean, it's always one of those things that with them, it goes back and forth, like by the day, it seems like sometimes, but I'd probably say like 3 or 4, it's just going to, I think it will partially depend though on the pro prospects of those 3 big names, between Peoples-Jones, Black, and Collins. If any of those 3 guys come back, it probably would affect, the bottom line in that regard, and they could use the scholarship somewhere else. If they know they have like a big time guy or a guy that can be big time coming back for another year.
Well, in this state, the player we hear most about is Port Huron Northern 4-star Braden McGregor, who is number 1 on a lot of teams' lists. What kind of position is Michigan in with him right now?
Right now, I think Michigan's in pretty good position. I've had my crystal ball on Michigan for a while now. I think there was a little bit of a reason for pause, I guess, when Greg Madison left, just because he had been the primary recruiter. He's the one that had put in all the time, and so anytime a guy like that leaves, whether they're like an A-plus recruiter or not, which I would say Madison's more towards the better side of a recruiter for sure. There's always going to kind of be a, is this going to change things type deal. But Sean Nua has done a really, really good job in kind of picking up the slack there and really maybe providing a little bit of a different approach. I mean, how can you, it's going to be a different approach. He's about, 35 or something years younger than Madison is, right? I mean, So it's just a different vibe, different approach in total. And McGregor and his camp have seemed to really resonate. Like Nua's pitch and Nua's approach has really resonated with his family. We've always kind of thought his family definitely prefers Michigan. Again, Notre Dame, I think probably the other program. I think Clemson was around for a while, but they like him on offense at tight end, and I think he wants to play defense in college. So, Notre Dame, Clemson, maybe again, but I don't think so. Maybe Ohio State a little bit too. I mean, obviously they're still trying with Madison. There's no reason for them not to. But I think right now, I think Michigan's in a pretty good spot there. He's a guy I also feel like that isn't going to drag the process out forever. We're kind of get, what is it, like almost May? We're getting to that point where some of these kids have been recruited really hard for a long time. And this is one of those like couple points in the year where you start to see a lot of verbals just because, the winter evaluation's over and then the spring, the new official visit period is over, and so some of these guys have taken 2 or 3 officials. They kind of already know who they like, who they don't, and so I think McGregor's among those guys who could probably verbal sometime before his senior season.
It seems like people really love this kid. Is he the kind of a player that you think right now could come right in and contribute?
I think he's capable of it, yeah. His junior film was excellent. His sophomore film was solid. I think he started as like a high 3-star. I think we had him in an 89, which is the highest 3-star you can get. It's still a very, very good prospect. But he took one of the bigger leaps of anybody in our last ranking. I mean, we had him at, I think, 27th overall in the country. I mean, he jumped over 250 spots in his junior film. Yeah, his junior film. I think it was like, there's always like random guy that nobody knew about who blew up, that probably jumped like 600 spots or something like that. But as far as a guy that was already kind of a known commodity to some extent, he took a really, really big leap. I know Alan Trieu, our Midwest analyst, like loves his game, and he's kind of your classic edge defensive end. Like, so he just got some Aiden Hutchinson in him, sort of similar style, more of a Rashawn Gary, just a classic edge rusher who can get to the quarterback. And so as far as being an instant impact guy, yeah, I mean, I think any guy that we usually have ranked within that top like 50 or so is a guy who's at least capable of playing right away. Just be a matter of, to me, there's 2 things that matter when it comes to that. Do they enroll early, which if they do, that really helps their chances. And B, if they don't enroll early, to me, it depends fully on what kind of shape they come in. When they show up in June or July, what kind of shape they're in, and so that's, for a lot of those guys, that's the biggest battle is, sticking to the nutrition plan, working out, doing the workouts the way Michigan wants you to when they can't actually be there with you when you're still at home. So, but yeah, as far as his athletic ability and his football ability, absolutely. I mean, he's a guy, I don't know, he might not be done rising, because he's only been to a couple of the T-shirts and shorts type camps, and the last one I think was it the opening one in Ohio? Whatever the last one was, there's been a few of them in the last few weeks. I can't keep track of them sometimes, but the last one he was at, he was dominant. And so, if he continues that, that's a deal where, you get to the actual opening or you get to one of the All-Star games, you have a big week there and you can keep moving up. So he may not be done, but either way though, borderline 5-star guy right now for sure.
Well, speaking of a 4 or 5-star guy that's going to visit, which this one surprises me a bit, maybe it shouldn't, but an Alabama commit, 4-star defensive tackle Jason Jones, who I think is the number 1 ranked player in Alabama. Sort of hard to believe Saban's going to let him get away, though, isn't it?
Yeah, there are guys like this every year. With Jones, yeah, he's like, I notice he's kind of periodically just randomly tweeted the 5 schools he's going to officially visit. Yeah. It's changed a few times, but Michigan has been mentioned. Oh, he's done it like 4 times, I think. Michigan's been in it twice. They're definitely still recruiting him. They need, defensive tackle, I think, is a place that they want to supplement. I think they want another sturdy, like, nose type guy, like how they got Mozzie Smith last year. I think they'd like another one of those this cycle. My thing on that, there's no reason not to be recruiting a guy of his caliber. Whether he ends up sticking with Alabama or not, it's a deal where it's still pretty early in the process overall. I know I just got done saying that for some of the kids, it's been a long process already, but there's still a whole football season to go, all kinds of possibilities or whatever. Definitely the type of talent you would want to keep investing resources in. And then you just kind of see what happens. What the worst that could happen is that he just sticks with Alabama, right? I mean, there's not really it's not as if he's a kid that I don't think anybody in Schembechler's like banking on it, anything like that. But, he is a big enough talent where it's like, hey, let's see where it goes. Like I said, I'll see if he sticks to the 5 schools that he just posted that he'll take an official to. But either way, he's expressed some interest in Michigan. I know they've been recruiting him. I think Chris Partridge, probably not a surprise to many, has been one of the guys I think has been one of the main deals there. I haven't caught up with him in a little while, so I'm interested to see if Nua has gotten involved there. I wouldn't be surprised. But I do know that Partridge is the one kind of running point there for a while. So, which again, if he's running point, the kid's going to be getting recruited hard, and it usually means that they'll have some kind of shot, right? Because Partridge is just such a good recruiter, and they always put Partridge on guys, that maybe they think they have a shot with or can get up to campus. So, we'll have to see, though. But, no, Jones is a very, top player in Alabama is usually a stud, right? He's an elite player, and like I said, a guy that's worth kind of continuing the process with at this point, in my opinion.
Well, we're in on some really good running backs in this class of 2020. I've read that 4-star Blake Corum is going to commit soon, I think in the next couple of weeks. Do you consider him a Michigan lean?
I do, yep. So he's another St. Francis Academy. They have the 2 already with Osmond Savage and Mazakua, or however you pronounce it.
Yeah.
That's Biff Poggi's program in Baltimore. I think it was a deal where I think, Michigan fans were kind of waiting for Michigan to sort of make a dent at that program, with the Poggi connection, and it really wasn't panning out. I mean, they missed on Iabi Anoma in the last minute a couple cycles ago. I mean, he was the 5-star that committed to Alabama. There have been others I'm off the top of my head, but the Poggi connection was kind of a thing where people, I think, were getting a little like, okay, is Michigan even going to get anybody from this school? Now they have 2 verbals. I think they're in really good shape for Corum. He's definitely more of your all-purpose, sort of a Chris Evans, how Chris Evans would be used in a Michigan offense type deal. More of a passing, receiving, and running threat. LSU, Virginia Tech, I think, are the other 2 schools that may have a shot there still. But if he is verbally committing anytime soon, I'd be actually kind of surprised if it wasn't Michigan. I mean, they've done a pretty good job there. And he's a guy that they've liked for a while. I mean, he's a guy we had listed as a top target well before, we knew that Michigan looked like they were in good shape. So be another nice win for them. I think they've done a pretty good job recruiting the running back position and, give them something a little bit different because they're going to have to, they only signed Charbonnet. Yeah. In 19, I think running back's a big need for them this cycle. So I think, and the guys I think they're going to get or want to get, they're going to try to kind of get a variety, right? So maybe a more of a bell cow guy would be the next type of back that they'd look for, more of a 25 carries guy if he needs to. With Corum, like I said, much more of a running and receiving threat out of the backfield.
Well, if we did pick him up, he would be, the 3rd commit, as you mentioned, from St. Francis. And I do believe there are another 3 players that we've offered from that very same school. It must be a heck of a team.
Yeah, I think there's more than that when you go, maybe in 2020, because I know at Trayshawn Holden, who's verbally committed to Alabama, is a guy that they still really like at the receiver spot. He's kind of one of the names I forgot about when we were talking about receivers. Mm-hmm. Holden. Damon Clowney, who committed to LSU, is Jadeveon Clowney's brother or cousin or something. And then there's in the lower classes, 2021 and 2022, I want to say they've offered multiple guys too. I want to say on their roster right now, there's probably 15 guys that have a Michigan offer, which is, it's crazy. Again, How many of them are offers or how many of them are actual, like, we want you offers? I don't know. Again, because those exist, and it's not really a mystery or a taboo subject at this point. I mean, some offers are more contingent on better performance down the road, one of those types of deals. So, but there are a lot of the guys that they do like. And so, and then you're seeing it because they're taking some of these guys, but it's a school that, it's going to be the DMV area, DC, Northern Virginia, Baltimore area, the next couple cycles is quietly, like, in my opinion, it's right up there with, like, Texas and Georgia. I mean, there are just tons and tons of kids. You talk about, like, St. John's College, Gonzaga, St. Francis. Like, there's 5 or 6 programs that are just DeMatha that are just totally loaded with D1 type kids. And so, getting in there, making some more inroads in there, I think is important for a lot of schools. Michigan's not the only school that's offered like 12 or 13 of those kids at St. Francis. I mean, there's some other programs that have too. So it's going to be a contentious spot, especially Mike Loxley coming in at Maryland. He knows how to recruit really well. So Maryland actually might be a factor for some of these guys. But they've offered more guys, probably more than I even know at that program at this point, because they've stopped through there a few times, and it feels like there's a couple new names added to the list. It's like this almost feels like their entire defense has a Michigan offer, which is insane. But it is going to be a big contentious area on the recruiting trail. Poji's connection seems to, do a little bit more for him lately. I mean, hard not to say it's not when they're picking up guys like that and they're in good shape for another. So, just have to see how it goes.
Well, circling back to the running back options again, 3-star all-purpose back Jabari Small, who's from Tennessee, also is high on our list. And it sounds like after his visit, he really loved it here.
Yeah, I think he told Bryce that Bryce Merritt, who helps on our is that Michigan leads.
Yeah,
I do know that as far as so Small is a guy that I think Michigan would definitely take a verbal commitment from. As things stand now, my only thing is if Corum was to commit, if that would change things. I don't necessarily think it would, because even then, Small is he's a little bit smaller. Corum's like I think 5'8" or 5'9", like 200. I think Small's more of your like 165, 170. More of a guy who's predicated fully on speed. Than Corum is a guy I think is a little more of a power speed mix. And so like I said, with a wide variety of guys I feel like they're willing to take. But again, especially with Gaddis's offense, you see how they use Sainer still in the spring game. Mm-hmm. There are a lot of types that, the idea of it being a running back is, they're probably still going to get some carries in between the tackles and stuff, but it's clear they're going to use these guys in a lot of different ways. And I think that kind of widens the spectrum as far as, the types of guys that they're willing to take. Whereas, 2 or 3 or 4 cycles ago, it was, it's a lot of power style, which again, I think they're still going to look to take one of those types of guys, but that used to be the focus. Now it's more of a wider variety of guys, because they wanted to give as many matchup problems or different looks to defense as they possibly can. So yeah, Small, I think, is a guy, at least right now, Michigan looks like they're in good shape. He seems underranked based on his offer list. I know he's got a handful of SEC offers. I suspect he'll be back up at some point. Like I said, for me, I haven't put in a crystal ball, basically waiting to see, if Corum was to verbal to Michigan, if that's going to change anything. I'm not saying that it would. I don't know, so I'm not going to really move forward on that one yet.
Well, with us on our Game Day segment this week for our monthly recruiting update is Steve Lorenz from 24/7 Sports. Steve, another player I've heard a lot about lately is 3-star offensive lineman Noah Nelson. He, of course, has a Michigan offer. What do you think of this kid?
So Noah, high ceiling guy. And that's the thing. Like, I think people have, even on our board who've followed recruiting for a while, just have a hard time seeming to comprehend. Michigan just signed 6 offensive linemen in 2019, 5 of which were 4-star prospects, all 6 of which were guys that they were in on for a while. There was no last minute flyer. These were guys that they liked all of them, but even the guys who were 3-stars, like Zach Carpenter was a 3-star across the board. When Michigan beat Clemson head to head for him, it was either Michigan or Clemson. Jack Stewart, Auburn, Texas A&M. So basically what I'm getting at is like they took like what they think is like a 6 very high level prospects on the offensive line.
Mm-hmm.
So then they take a kid like Mazkua, who was like I think he was like an 84 and 85, and then Nelson I think is an 86 on 24/7, and people are like, well, and yeah, well, it's really basically what it sounds like. Yeah, it's really what it comes off as when people complain about it. But it's like they're in a position right now. I mean, you look at the spring game, you look at the even remove the 6 guys they just took. This is the first time I can remember Michigan looking like they have a strong 2 deep at every position on the offensive line in probably 8-9 years, maybe,
Mm-hmm.
right? I mean, It's been forever. And so you have a 2 deep already, and then you have 6 more true freshmen coming in. I think they're in a position right now where they can take guys who, sort of what we talked about with the 18 class, where it's like they can take guys who maybe have a higher ceiling, guys that they don't need an instant impact guy right now up front. Is there one position you can think of up front where you're never going to turn down a guy if he's, a no doubter, 5-star guy. But what I'm saying is they're not, it's not a pressing need in that regard. And they feel really good about, it's like Runyon, and then you got Ryan Hayes waiting in the wings, who has not given up 1 year of eligibility yet. And we've heard nothing but incredible things about what he looks like and what he could become, and it's like, so there's no big hurry. That's why Nelson is a guy, actually kind of reminds me of Ryan Hayes. Long, athletic, he's not already built like a college offensive lineman, a guy that have to put on some weight, one of those types of deals. But, when Michigan and Oklahoma with Bill Biedenbaugh, who's one of the best offensive line coaches in college football, if not like a top 2 or 3, between him and Warner are hot after this kid, to me that's a better indication that there's something there than that he's an 86, which again is, people look at 86, that's still a really good like high school prospect, right? Like, well, people look at it like it's some throwaway because the other guy's an 89 or the other guy's a 90, right? But an 86 is still, and like I said, let alone you have coaches like Warner and Biedenbaugh who are like really hot after him and been recruiting him hard for like over a year. So he's visited twice in the last like 4 or 5 weeks. He already used his official. He was up a couple, not this weekend, but the weekend before. Visit went really well. My crystal ball has been on Michigan since February. I was the first one and the only one for a couple months until recently. Still feel really good there. If he does verbal sometime this spring or summer, I'd feel really good about Michigan's chances. And again, he's a guy Michigan's been recruiting the heck out of him for a long time. This isn't this wouldn't surprise anybody. Like he's been listed as a top target for us for a while too. We do our top targets page where I kind of keep track, my opinion on what their recruiting board looks like. And Nelson's been on the top target part for a while. So, and again, the funny thing is too, he's out of Arizona, is the big Taylor Lewan fan, and that mattered, and it's like, so that's kind of paid off for him a little bit too. I think he's a kid that wants to wear the 77 at Michigan, and so that's one of those little random things that you can't really bank on any given kid, but that can help you, So, Ed Warner's done such a good job too. I've written about it a lot, but man, I just can't get over it. Like, they're in on so many guys up front. It's almost hard to keep track of who, they're listed in top 5s and 6s constantly right now, and not just in 2020, but 2021. And he's done such an awesome job. I think that's been the biggest surprise. We all knew, I think, that they were going to get a good coach, but he's really, in my opinion, been an elite recruiter for them. Way better. Like, that was kind of the knock on him. I think our Ohio State affiliate had come over when he signed on and said that you're getting maybe the best offensive line coach in college football, but that he's basically an above average recruiter. And from my standpoint, he's been way more than that for them. So, so props to Ed Warner. I think he's been a great surprise on the recruiting trail, and Nelson again is a guy I feel like they're in really good shape with.
Well, 4-star quarterback commit J.D. Johnson is going to, or already, I'm not sure, has visited Texas A&M and Oregon. Is there any sense that he might be wavering?
That one, he took his official last weekend. So here's the thing. I think he's probably going to re-solidify publicly. I don't know if he's like flat out said it, because he's been to A&M, he's been to Oregon, he's been talking to some other schools. My only concern is, and I don't know if it'd be an issue or not. It might not. It might be nothing. But anytime a guy takes a guy who lives that far away, and this might include Nelson. I don't know, if he ends up verbaling to Michigan or not. But anytime a kid who lives that far away takes their official visit that early, it's a long time. And again, like I said, he may come. I don't know. Maybe he comes to every home game. I don't know. But I know, like, when you're taking your official that early, that means any visit you take to campus after that point is on your own dime. The chance for Michigan to take the tab is over. That's done. And so, April, it was in my opinion, it was kind of a peculiar time for him to take his official visit. A lot of times they really like their verbals to all take official visits either to one of the big games or like between the final game of the season and like the first signing period, because they like to get all their verbals up with maybe some of those top targets who are going to decide, on that first signing day. So for him to come up now, I thought was kind of interesting. I don't know if it's because he needed to reaffirm some things or see things again to make sure that Michigan's where he wanted to be. But there's no doubt he was entertaining other situations. I mean, like I said, A&M kind of randomly had him on campus a few weeks ago, and then he visited Oregon, is really kind of clicking on the recruiting trail right now. So, we'll see. I suspect he's solid. So that's the thing, is I've never really been led to believe that he's not solid, right? But, it's just, we'll see I'm interested to see when he's going to take his next unofficial. Like, I haven't caught up with him yet, and I don't know if I will. I think that's a guy that Bryce has been on. But, to see when he's going to come back again, I think will be interesting, and go from there. But that's the thing. So, he did verbal when Pep was still coach, but I know that the Gaddis, the rest of it, like, they all are really high on him still. It's not a deal where they're sort of what we talked about at wide receiver. I think Johnson's a guy that they really like regardless. So, definitely a guy they want to hang on to for sure.
Well, of course, it's going to get interesting in the coming weeks and months with a lot of these kids committing at a variety of times. But overall, how do you think the class is shaping up so far?
With their verbal list right now is not something, that it's not the best spot they've been in at this point. But at the same time, though, they're in on a lot of guys, and this is second straight cycle already. We did our first 2020 re-rank about a month and a half ago, and like I said, we've had our top targets list set for a while. That's not a reactive deal to where, like, we find out they like somebody. Usually we have a pretty good idea, and the guys are pretty high on their board. And it was amazing to see, like, how many of the guys that we already had listed as top targets who took huge leaps up in our rankings. You talk about McGregor, which was kind of a given that we knew he was going to move up to some extent. I don't think I anticipated he'd move that high, but it also wasn't like a big surprise. But you go up and down the line, and the guys that they've been recruiting really hard, like probably about 80% of them, like, took really, really big leaps, especially guys on the defensive side of the ball. Like a kid like Antoine Powell, a top defensive end they really like out of Virginia, and went from like an 87 to 116th in the country, and like, so that's what we talked about in 2019. When you look at the verbal list, almost all of those guys, like, not almost all, but many of them took just massive, like, I always look at Trent Jones was the one guy who like was an 87, 88 for a lot of the process. We kept saying he was one I was kind of pounding my arm, hitting the desk a little bit about, because I was like, I knew this guy was better than what he was ranked. And then, so when they actually got to see him at the Under Armour game, and then he ended up almost in the rank in the top 100, and there were a bunch of guys like that for them that cycle. So, I think our evaluators and just the evaluators in general seem to be on the same page with Michigan as far as, like, who's a good prospect and who's not. So I'm kind of in the boat where most of the time I'm fully on board as far as, like, if Michigan takes a guy, especially at this point in the process, I think there's a pretty good chance that the guy's going to be, at least has a shot to be a really good player, right? So, but they're in on it, like, not that with standings, like, they're still in on guys that are highly ranked. Like Jordan Morant was just on campus, #1 safety in the country. Michigan leads the crystal ball there. I think they do. They're close. If not, they will soon, I would guess. that gives them the number one safety prospect 2 years in a row. They've I talked about Powell, McGregor. I think they'll still keep going with Aaron Lewis, who just verbally committed to West Virginia, is another guy that they really like. So I don't think there's really much reason for concern. I talked about the offensive line as a spot where they took the Mizkua, who's a little lower ranked. They're in good shape with Noah Nelson, who's a little lower ranked, but a lot of the other guys they're in on up front are highly ranked type guys. And like I said, there's too many of them to name because Warner's done such a good job. Running back, Corum's a 4-star. Wide receiver, like we talked about, AJ Henning a little bit, is a top 100 guy. So this is, like I said, I think by the time the season rolls around, you get to August, September, you almost always have a much better idea of how things are going to shape up. It's like I've always put such a big emphasis on, however you play during the season will really end up dictating the final product as far as your recruiting class goes. But at the same time, there's more and more kids now, or especially with this early official visit period, more and more kids are verbally committing earlier. And, more often than not, Michigan is going to win enough games to hang on to most of those guys. You might lose a couple guys every year. I mean, every school does. But by and large, they're holding on to most of the guys that they get early on that they want to keep. And so, I think, like I said, get to like July, August, I think we'll have a much better idea. But it's definitely like way too early to look at their verbal list and say, well, what's going on or what's the problem? Because I don't think so. I think they're in good shape with a lot of the guys that they really, really like right now.
Well, last question for you, Steve, for today is nothing to do with recruiting. It seems like the main focus of fans in the last couple of months when they looked at spring practice was, what's Josh Gaddis going to do? What's that offense going to look like, et cetera, et cetera. From what he says and Jim says, it's all Gaddis' offense. And still, to me, after being around this for so long, that is a huge shift in philosophy for Jim, isn't it?
Yeah, I think so. I think like he's always been willing to kind of make the necessary changes. That's one of the things about, like, I thought was one of the biggest misconceptions about him was that he was like stubborn. He's now cut ties with guys that he worked with for 10, 15 years, multiple guys that he's worked with for 10 or 15 years, to try to get, not say to try to get things right, but to try to take that next step, and I don't think it's unfair or crazy to kind of view the Josh Gaddis hire the same way you look at the Don Brown hire, as far as like, Michigan had a really good defense with DJ Durkin, and then they hired Don Brown and they kind of take the next step. It's like last year, Michigan's offense they weren't horrible.
No.
They put up big points against Penn State, Wisconsin. It's like they could score points, but I think it's a deal where there's an opportunity to take that next step. And what I like about the situation, I mean, Gaddis looks like a guy, sounds like a guy, seems like a guy, that looks like it's going to be successful. I mean, again, we don't know yet. We haven't seen him play in an actual game, but the biggest thing for me is they had such a mix of experience, talent, and not just talent, but it kind of fits like their personnel. As successful as they probably would have been with finally having a returning starter at quarterback, they would have been successful offensively either way this year, in my opinion. But I think it's a scheme that really kind of fits the personnel for the most part. You're loaded at wide receiver. You have a quarterback that I think makes better plays when he's outside the pocket. And now you kind of have that mix of speed and ability at the running back position, which again, I think that's one of the people a little bit too worried. The Charbonnet deal, they knew he was probably going to sit out this spring from the day he enrolled. It's a minor injury that they're just being very, very cautious with. He had his knee checked out. Same with Christian Turner, fought some very minor stuff. They're just being very cautious with those guys because they're going to be very important, I think, in the season. But I think that it's interesting. They're not reinventing the wheel here. I think it's a situation where it's a group that's capable of picking this up right away and then doing something with it. It's not Lloyd Carr leaving and then you're switching to Rich Rodriguez's offense and it's like, what the heck? You lose Ryan Mallett. It's not that type of deal. I think it's an offense to where They should be able to pick it up and do something with it right away. And I don't think that the learning curve or the growth period is going to be as, growing pains are going to be what it might normally be, and so that's where I think it's interesting. If you're a fan, I think it's hard not to be kind of excited at the possibility, right? I think, I liked what they showed in the spring game. I think part of it was for recruiting. It's always part of its recruiting, is to showcase some of the different looks, how they want to get, guys the ball in open space, that type of deal. So, yeah. So, and like I said, I think this offense fits Shea Patterson's skill set a lot more than, and again, I thought you had a good year last year. I think the people that are the critics, I mean, yeah, he wasn't perfect. He short-armed some balls, like whatever, but it was one of the best statistical seasons Michigan quarterbacks had in a long time. It's like, so, but I think that this type of offense fits his skill set more than, maybe another year under Pep, would have, so be interesting. I kind of look at it the same way I look at the Don Brown hire. I think at least the aim is the same, where it's like things were good, but I think that Harbaugh has a clear realization that things could be better, and that making a move like this was, maybe necessary to take that next step. So, but again, we'll see how it works out.
Yeah, we certainly will, and I know fans are excited, and I think you're right. A lot of people have talked about for the 4 years he's been here, Jim Harbaugh is a little bit stiff. He wants to run that offense where we're going to pound it with the fullback, pound the running game like he did at Stanford. He has shown a lot of flexibility with Colin Kaepernick in San Francisco on the NFL side. So that he brought Josh Gaddis in here, to me, might shock some people, but I just think it also shows, and should show fans, he's willing to do what it takes to utilize the people that he has, his personnel, to get the most out of them and win football games.
Totally agree. There's really not much else to say on top of that, because his actions have proven it, and, when he hired Don Brown, he didn't even know Don Brown.
Right.
It wasn't like he's hired some buddy of his that was coach. It's like this was, same deal. You can even go back to when he hired Jed Fish. What did he say? He never had a conversation with Jed Fish before he hired him?
Right.
It's like, so yeah, it's like, because I think by and large, way more often than not, their assistant coaching hires have been great. I mean, you can even look at when he brought on McElwain, how much better the receivers looked in 18 than they did in 17, and part of that's probably experience, but what I'm getting at is like most of the time that these hires have seemed to have panned out, and Gaddis, read what Alabama's reaction was to him leaving. You saw how badly Maryland wanted him, how Michigan kind of stole him from Maryland pretty much, before that happened.
Yeah.
And then a guy like Harbaugh, again, who I think has a good eye for coaching talent. I mean, you look at all the assistants of his who have gone on to either head coach or, lead programs elsewhere. I think you should feel pretty good about the chances that this might work out. And, like I said, part of that's because the guy they hired is going to be a good hire, but a part of it is also because, like I said, they have a lot of talent and they have a ton of experience returning. And I think you have a really hungry group that's kind of ready to kind of take that next step.
With us on our game day segment this week, talking recruiting, getting back to our monthly recruiting updates, has been Steve Lorenz from 24/7 Sports, and there's been, as you can tell, a lot to talk about. So, Steve, as always, we appreciate the time and look forward to getting you back on next month and see what's new.
Sounds good, Mike. Appreciate it.
Quick Hits is next as we wrap it up for another week here on The Michigan Man on Wolverine Sports Radio, a member of the V Sporto Network and in partnership with SB Nation's Maize and Brew.
On Quick Hits today, softball swept 3 from Illinois down there over the weekend. This week we have the final 4 home games of the season. Sparty on Tuesday, today as we record, and Penn State is in for 3 this weekend. Next week we close the regular season on the road at Maryland with 3. We are 33-11 overall, 15-1 in Big Ten action. Baseball took 3 from Northwestern last weekend. This week, Maryland is in town for a 3-game weekend series. We are 28-11 overall, 8-3 in Big Ten play. A reminder, our free show app is available from the iTunes and Google Play stores. If you get the show from iTunes, please take a minute to rate or comment on the program. It really does help us a bunch. As most of you know, we slow it down in May, June, and July. I'll have 2 shows a month for you during that time period. And as I always say, we aren't going away, just slowing down to enjoy some summer with friends and family and recharge the batteries for football season, which for us here on the show gets underway when we return to weekly programming in August. So make a note, our next show will air on May the 8th. That will do it for another week. I'm your host, Mike Fitzpatrick. Have a great Wolverine week, everyone. We'll see you right back here on May 8th with our next show. Until then, take care, and as always, go Blue. Thanks for joining us today on The Michigan Man, here on Wolverine Sports Radio, a member of the V Sporto Network, and in partnership with SB Nation's Maize and Brew. Our listener lines are open 24/7 for your calls at 313-263-4842. That's 313-263-4842. Or email us at themichiganmanpodcast@yahoo.com. That's themichiganmanpodcast@yahoo.com. The Michigan Man Podcast is produced at the studios of Robin Lynn Productions, Allen Park, Michigan, and is not affiliated with the University of Michigan. Go Blue!